Creating our first dashboard. In this session we will discuss about creating our first dashboard. So first thing before we start creating our dashboard is that Grafana is only a visualization tool. By default it doesn't have any mechanism to store the data. Okay, so if you want to create a dashboard you need to have some kind of data sources. It can be MySQL database, or it can be Influx database, it can be Graphite, or it can be any other supported data sources. Okay, because what Grafana is going to do is it is just going to connect to your data source, and then it is going to create beautiful visualizations. It is going to give you the ability to create beautiful graphs, beautiful visualizations and things. However, Grafana itself doesn't store any of the data which you have. Okay, so if I click here on the plus on the left side and I can go to dashboard. Now here I have an option to adding new panel, and let's click on add new panel. And then here if you notice under the query window we have something called default. Okay, and here we have lots of other data sources available. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we should be creating our data source. So we should be able to see that created data source here, and then we'll be able to select that data source and then create our dashboard on top of that data source. Okay, so right now I'm just going to go back again, and then I'm going to click on configuration, and from the configuration we have option of selecting data source. That's one way of going to data source option. The other way is you can go to home option, and in this case I'm just going to discard it. So you click on home option, and then there you have something called add your first data source. So if you click on here, basically this is just going to take you to the add new data source option. Okay, so that's one way, and the way I prefer is going to configuration and then going to data sources, and after that go and click on add data source. Okay, now in our example we are going to connect to MySQL database, so I need to select MySQL database, but you can connect to lots of other available data sources. Okay, we will see connecting to some of different data sources as well. In this case we can just go ahead with MySQL, and now select or click on select option here, and then you will be going to the settings option of that data source. In this case now I have been moved to MySQL connection data source. Now here I need to provide hostname and database username and the password of the database to which I want to connect to. Now in your case I believe you should be having a database, and also you should be having the tables to which you want to connect to. In my case, let me show you what I have done. So as you remember, for Grafana we used MySQL database. So in that MySQL database I just created one more table which is called matrix, and in that matrix table I'm just sending some dummy data. That data is basically kind of CPU utilization data, and that data we are going to use for creating the visualization. So let me connect to MySQL and show you how that data looks like. Okay, so now to connect to MySQL you can use MySQL command and then space -u. You need to provide the username here. In this case the username which I have is Grafana, and then you need to type -p, and then you can provide the name of the database. So in this case our database is Grafana DB. Hit enter, and then it is going to ask for password. So give the password which you have, and then you are going to be connected to MySQL, and by default it is using Grafana database because that's the database we passed when we connected to this MySQL client. Now here I can do something like select, or let's do show star, or actually the syntax is show tables. So we can, once we do show tables, you can see here this is the table which is called matrix. This is the one which I have created. So other than this table, all the other tables are Grafana application related tables. Okay, so I'm not installing MySQL again. I'm just going to use the same MySQL which is used by Grafana application as well, and inside that I have just created one table which is called matrix. And if we want to see the data of this table is, so we can do select star from matrix, and let's say we just want to see 10 records, so I'm going to use limit 10, hit enter, and then you can see that's the data we have. Okay, so we have dt which is date time, we have cpu which is like cpu utilization, then we have io weight which is io weight, and then we have idle time of this system. Okay, again this is just the dummy data which I'm inserting to this database every second using one script. Okay, so here you can see on the other side I already have this script running which is actually inserting one record every 1 second along with some random numbers. Okay, so this is something which you don't need to do. If you already have data, you can just connect to that data. In my case I had to create this table, and then I'm going to connect to this table. So the things to remember is, now we will be needing a connection information to connect to this database, and then connect to this table which is called matrix. Okay, so now let's go back to Grafana again. So here in the settings I need to give the hostname on which MySQL is installed. So in this case we have MySQL installed on the same machine where Grafana is installed. So in that case I can give localhost, and the port on which MySQL running is 3306. Okay, in your case if you have MySQL installed on a remote server, okay, which is different than the server on which Grafana is installed, in that case you need to change here, you need to change localhost, and you need to provide the actual hostname or the IP address of the server where MySQL is installed. Then here you need to provide the name of the database to which you want to connect to. In this case database is called Grafana DB, so I have given that. And the username is, type the username and password. In this case I have given the username and password, and then that's all you need. Then you can click on save and test, and if it works, and if Grafana is able to connect to MySQL, then it is going to show a success message. Otherwise it is just going to show failure message or the errors which it is getting. So I'm just going to now click on save and test, and let's see what happens. Okay, now here you see data source updated and database connection is okay. So I see all the green signals, which means everything is completely okay and we are able to connect to this data source. Now if you see here on the top, this is the default name of this data source which is called MySQL. Now let's say I want to change it and I want to give some meaningful name, so I can give it name of matrix, or let's call it matrix data source. So for data source I'm going to type ds and matrix in the beginning. So whatever naming convention which your organization follows, you can follow those naming convention, and then you can click on save and test again because we have changed the name, so we must be clicking on save and test. So once you do that, again it is going to say data source updated. Also you are going to see the connection okay message again, and that's the indication that now it is working. Now let's say if you want to make this data source as the default data source whenever you create a panel, in that case you can click this default to, basically you can turn it on, and then matrix ds is going to be the default data source whenever you have any new panel created. So let me turn it off and click on save and test, and then let's see what happens when we go to plus icon on the left side and go to dashboard. So I'm going to press Control key while I'm selecting dashboard, so it opens on a new tab. Now it is opening in a new tab. Okay, now here I'm going to select add new panel. Now if you see, when we do add new panel, here we see some other data source. We don't see our data source as the default one. So if I click on this drop down, and then I can see the new data source which we have created, which is called matrix underscore ds. Now I want to keep matrix underscore ds as the default data source. So in that case, we should be able to change it to, or turn it on, and then click on save and test again, and then you can just close this. I'm just going to close this panel, and this is something custom which I have already made. I'm going to show you exactly how we can make like this. Now let's go to plus and click on dashboard, and now here we should be able to see option to create a new panel. Once we click on add new panel. Okay, now here in the default, as of now, I still do not see matrix ds. Okay, so I have to see what's going on here. So now we can click on plus, and now we can go on to create a new dashboard. So I'm going to click on plus, then I'm going to click on dashboard while I'm holding the control key. So what it will do is it is going to open this in a new tab, or otherwise you can also right click and then you can click on open link in new tab. So once you do that, now you should be able to see an option to create a new panel. So click on add new panel, and in the add new panel you should have an option of query, and under the query you should be able to see some data sources, and if you click on the drop down you should be able to see the data source which you have created. In this case we have created matrix underscore ds, so I'm going to select this, and then this is the option which I get. Okay, so by default from the matrix data source it has selected one table name which is called alert. Okay, so whatever you see after from is your table name. So we don't want alert table. The table which we have is, you already know, that is called matrix. So if you click on alert, okay, just left click on alert, and here you will have an option to type matrix. Okay, once you start typing couple of the letters of your table, then the table is going to be shown here, and you can select the table. So in this case I'm going to select matrix. That's the table which we have. And the second thing which we need to do is we need to select a column which is having a date time. Okay, so one thing which you need to remember about Grafana is Grafana basically deals with a time series kind of data sources, okay, which is also called telemetry data sources. So basically all your data source must have a column which is having a date and time. Okay, so in my case I already have a table which is having a column which is having date time basically. Okay, so that column name is called dt. So in that case, if I click here, by default it is showing a column name which is called CPU. Okay, so here you can see we also have a column named CPU, but this is not the one which is having date time. Date time is in the dt column. So in that case I need to click on this column. Okay, as you see, once I move my mouse cursor there on the CPU, it changes to a hand symbol. Okay, so once you click here you will be getting an option to select other columns. Okay, so these are the other columns of my matrix table. So in this case I'm going to select dt. dt is the column which is having date time. Okay, so until now if you see, we do not have any option, or we don't really see anything here, but we will figure that out soon. Okay, so now we have selected a table name in the from clause, and also in the time column we have selected a column which is basically having a date time, and then this is the statement, select statement, where you select all the columns or all the visualization which you want to see. Okay, in this case I want to see maximum CPU utilization, so we have selected, or rather this was the default option which was coming. But if you want to change this column to any other column, you can click on here on the CPU, and then you are going to see all the other available columns. Okay, so you know our data source has other columns like IO wait and idle other than CPU. So we see all these columns here once we click on the default column option. So here I'm going to keep selecting CPU, and then here on the, if you click here on the plus, you will have options of using aggregate functions, you will have an option of using alias, and you will have an option of selecting more columns. So in this case, first I will click on aggregate functions because I want maximum CPU utilization. Okay, so in that case I'm going to select aggregate function, and then I'm going to select maximum. And once you click on aggregate maximum, you are going to get an alias as well. So this alias by default is the same column name. I'm going to click on this and then going to change it to max underscore CPU. Okay, hit enter, and that's all you need to do here. Now let's say if you want to add one more column. Okay, in that case you can click again on this plus symbol, and then you can click on column, and then it is going to create a new row under this select section. And here you see we have the column name CPU shown by default. Let's say we want to change it to idle, so we can change it to idle. And let's say we want to see the minimum of idle time, so we can change the aggregate function to minimum, and in the alias name we can change it to min underscore idle. Hit enter, and now you have two columns. Okay, and on which you have performing some aggregations. By the way, right now we are working on query editing mode. This is very useful, which I really like to work with this mode. However, if you already have your custom query made, you can use that custom query directly, so we'll learn about that as well. Now the reason as of now you have not seen the data is because of this where filter. Okay, so I'm just going to click here on the macro, and once you click on the macro you should be able to see an option of remove. So I'm just going to click on remove, and then once we do that, once we no longer have any filter, we can see our data. Okay, so by default you see in the group by we have interval, which is actually anything which is starting with a dollar symbol, that is a variable. Okay, so here dollar interval means is whatever interval you are going to select from here. Okay, here you see you have refresh dashboard, and then you have these are the default intervals. So whatever interval you select here, that's the interval which is going to be reflected there. Okay, again if you want to remove this, you can remove this, otherwise you can just leave it as it is. Or let's say you want to change this interval to different intervals, you have an option to do that as well. So in my case I'm just going to leave it as it is, because this is just a sample dashboard which we are creating. Okay, now this dashboard as of now does not have a name. It has a default name which is called panel title. Okay, so you can click here on the panel title, and then you have some other options. But by the way, if you just click here on, if you just see on the right side, you have something called panel properties. Okay, so in case you don't see this panel properties, that is might be because you have already clicked on this close options pane. So if you have clicked on close options pane, in that case you are just going to see something like this, and then you can click on show options, and it is going to show you the panel properties. Now here on the panel properties, under the settings, we can change the panel title. So I'm going to change it and going to call it CPU utilization panel with matrix DS. Okay, that's the data source which we are using. And if you want, you can provide some description. This is completely optional. I'm just going to copy and paste the same thing here. So if you notice, as soon as you provide some description, you are also going to see one eye symbol here on the panel on the top left side. So once I hover over to that section, it is going to show me the description, whatever description is written here. Okay, so it is a good way when you have like 4 or 5 different panels on your dashboard. It is a good approach that you define a description name for each of the panels, so your user can understand what is the purpose of each of the panels. Okay, in this case, let me make it CPU utilization using custom script. Okay, so that's all. Once I hover over here, let me just save it. Okay, so basically it takes some time to refresh, and once you click on here, you are going to see the new message has starting to appear. Okay, that's one thing about giving panel title and description. The other things which you can do is you can change the visualization. So by default, the default one is graph, but let's say if you want some other type of visualizations, you can do that as well. Again, remember the query which you are using here is going to be different based on the visualizations which you are choosing. For example, if you see here on the stat, it is going to show you only one option. So the query which you need to create for stat is going to be different than the one which we have created here for graph dashboard or graph visualization. Okay, so we'll see about other things later on. Now if you just scroll down, you have something called display. So you can play with displays, different options, and based on whatever changes you make here, the graph is going to get changed. So if I enable bars, or if I, let's say, disable lines, you can see the lines option has gone. You can enable it again. You can change the line width. Let's make it 7, and you can see now I have very thick line. Okay, then again in the area fill, you can select different options, and you can see the fill has changed. And in the fill gradient, again you can select something different, and you will see the gradient has changed. So you have an option to make changes on how you want this panel to look like. Okay, those are all available under the visualization display properties. So if I enable these points, and let's say we change the radius of these points, in this case we don't see any difference, but again depending on the visualizations which we have selected, you are going to see different visualizations when you make changes here. Okay, now we will discuss some different options in our upcoming sessions. For now, you have understood some of the basic things about creating a panel. Okay, so when you create a panel, you need a data source to connect to. So first thing, you should always create a data source. Then you can go ahead creating a dashboard, and inside the dashboard you need to create a panel. Okay, and when you create the panel, you can define the queries here, and you can save the panel with the panel title and the panel description, and then you can hit on save. So once you click on save, it is going to ask for a dashboard name. So I'm going to call it example 01 CPU. Let's call it CPU utilization dashboard, and we can save it under general. Okay, and click on save, and now we have our beautiful dashboard ready. That's only having one panel. Okay, now let's say if I want to have a different panel which is almost similar, and we just want to change that from max CPU to minimum CPU. So in that case, you can come here onto the title, and you can click here on the drop down option, and you have an option of duplicate under the more options. So you can click on duplicate, and everything is going to get duplicated. Then you can come here and go to edit, and this way I can just quickly go to the query and I can change this aggregate from max to min. And let's say I don't want this column, then you can click here on the column. Once you do that, it is going to give you an option of remove. So I just got rid of idle, so the only column which I have now is CPU column, and we are now seeing the minimum CPU utilization. And also I'm going to change alias name to min underscore CPU. Hit enter, you can save it, and you need to provide some description about what is the kind of change which you are making. So I'm going to call it adding minimum CPU utilization panel, and click on save. That's all, it's been saved. Now you can click here on the go back arrow, or you can press escape. So I'm just going to click here on the go back, and now we have two panels ready. Again, if you want to resize or if you want to rearrange, you can do that. Okay, so if you want to, let's say you want to make it a bit longer, you can do that. If you want to show it just parallel to each other, you can do it, or if you want to show it under each other, you can do that as well. So that's about creating a dashboard and also being able to visualize that. Now by default this is going to be refreshed whenever you hit refresh dashboard option from here. And let's say you want this dashboard to be auto refreshing every 30 seconds. In that case, you can click here on the drop down which is next to refresh, and you can select the interval. In this case, let's say we want this dashboard to be changing or refreshing automatically every 30 seconds, so we can select 30 seconds. Okay, so now every 30 seconds this data will keep on changing and you will always see the latest visualization.